I used to own a classic Rickenbacker bass. See how happy I was? Unfortunately, I had to sell it. So the one thing I can say to you is that if you have a bass, don't ever sell it. Sell your house, sell your car, sell yourself into bondage, but don't sell your bass or you will regret it. When I had the bass, I used to just play it I used to just record it directly when I was doing my music. But then after I sold it, I used my guitar to work out the bass part. After I'd done that, I would play the bass parts into my DAW in using my favorite virtual instruments. So what's wrong with that? Well, first off, I'm not very good at the instrument. If there was a real bass player there, somebody who has some gift for the instrument, it would just be a lot better. I'd be inspired by the things that this bass player would do. EZBass and the ujam basses do that for me with the bass. But they do it in different ways. So I'm going to compare them in this video. May the best bass win. There are at least 15 ways to get your music into EZBass. Let's go through them. Now in the audio tracker, you can bring in bass, guitar, or percussive audio, or you can record it directly. In the drum and keys section, you can bring in keys 2 ways, and drums 4 ways. In the tap to find section, you can play a rhythm or a melody, and you can also record a melody. And you can drag in MIDI to a user folder, a folder on your computer. So how many ways can you bring your music into ujam basses? Well, you really can't. They're not designed that way. They're instruments. The only way you could bring some MIDI into them is to bring them into your DAW. So what do I take from all of that? The idea that you have 15 different ways to bring music into EZBass, and you really don't have any for the ujam basses. Well, I see EZBass as a virtual instrument that's intended to take some music and bring it to another level, to finish it, to do the fine tuning. So you're really in the place of being a composer, a producer. The ujam basses are aimed at the player. It's about making music in the moment, just feeling it. Now, of course, you can do both things as a musician. And at some point you're going to be the player, and at some point you're going to be the person who's editing it. But for me, I'm looking at these two instruments and trying to pick up what they're like in general, and that's the way I see it. All the controls on the 4 ujam basses are on one page. And you see these 4 controls are the most important for sound sculpting. So like on the acoustic bass, you've got neck and bridge and room on the other. And then on the rowdy electric guitar, it's fuzz and it's drive. And on the Royal, it's pickup and it's drive. And then on the Dandy, it's again neck and bridge and drive. But the important thing about it is that these are your 4 main controls. It's so clear because they're large and that they're set against white background. And then the other controls are smaller. It's darker down there, so you can tell that they're secondary. When you look up here, you see that there's a play range. This is where you play your chords, and when you play the chords, they will play patterns that are set up by these key switches, and you can see very easily on screen which key switch you're playing. These 2 octaves here are common phrases. They work the same way on all four of the basses, and they're relatively simple patterns. And then these 11 phrases here change with every phrase set that comes with the instrument. There's 60 of them, and they're arranged in tempo order. And there is also a there's also up here, there's what they call presets, and the presets change the styles, but they also change the sounds. So I'm gonna latch this, and you can see. So, okay, now it'll keep playing. I've pretty much shown you everything. There's a switch up here when you want to take the player off, the auto player thing, and play it as just an instrument. And then here's this pushes the mod wheel, damps it, and the pitch wheel, it's called force, so it makes the velocity larger. Now, if you happen to have a Native Instruments keyboard, the ujam basses work with it perfectly. The knobs will control pretty much everything that's up there, and you get feedback, you know, on the keyboard as to what the setting is. I mean, I can change the pickup, I can change the drive on this instrument, I can change EQ, I can change the compressor, octaver, and so on. The first thing you see when you look at the user interface of EZBass is that it's a bit more complicated than the one-page design of the ujam basses. It's got all these tabs with different pages on top, but it's very well laid out, very intelligently designed. At the bottom, there is a timeline which should be very familiar to you if you have easy keys. It works exactly the same way. And this timeline is visible no matter what page you're on. And there's also drop-down menus here, and at the top of every page you can see which bass you've got, and you can also see what sound you have and whether it's picked or fingered. You also, on this page only, you can tweak the sounds, and there's also a thing where you can adjust tuning. The grooves page is where you search for and audition grooves. So, for example, if I push this replace MIDI button, I can then play these grooves and they will match. Put up mellow, the chords that I put in. Down. You can see that in addition to notes, they've got some articulations. You heard the little, there's a little smack that what happened there. That's part of that pattern. It's part of how cool EZBass is. You can get some pretty complicated effects with it, as I will get into later. What's great about this page is how many options you have to sort it. And everything that you put in as a filter turns up here, so it's easy to end up with very few things in the list. So this clear all filters button is important. One of the great things is it also has a search bar. So let me type in 90 and show you something interesting. In addition to all the 90 BPM EZBass patterns, there's also, you start to see there's something that says user MIDI, and that's because in my libraries I have put in some Groove Monkey songs, and some of them were 90 beats per minute. And so EZBass found them. This adds a lot to the power of this thing for searching for stuff, which is going to be important because we all know that Toontrack is going to sell us a ton of MIDI patterns, and we're going to have a lot of trouble searching through all of them. Here's the grid editor where you will do your editing of your patterns. I will get into that later. And then I've already shown you the drum and keys page and the audio tracker page. And the reality is you're not going to be on them much. You're going to be doing your work here and here mostly. Do want to say that these controls for tweaking your effects do not work from NKS. There's also some choices in tuning, a regular bass tuning, a piano tuning, perfect tuning. The piano tuning is to make it work well with easy keys. One of the things under settings that's important to me is the keyboard shortcuts. It's really quite helpful to have keyboard shortcuts put in. Metronome. Here's a velocity thing if you want to set up your keyboard to work with it. In general, I would say that this takes some learning. While well laid out and beautifully designed, it is, there's a learning curve. There's a learning curve you're going to have to work to use this to its utmost. Now I want to show you finally one really crazy thing. While under View, you can not only adjust it to the size of your monitor and then scale it all the way from 70% to 250%. You can drag the interface sideways. So if you had a really big, wide monitor, one of those curved jobs, or even if you had a whole bunch of monitors, I think it will stretches like taffy. Imagine how useful that will be when you're working on a long timeline of a song. Another thing you can see here is that you can add more tracks. And that means you can be working on alternate versions of your songs, or if you might want to be working on different part of the song, you can create things here and then drag it over. Very, very useful feature. I have here a little piece from Easy Keys. It's just a simple reggae pattern, and then I have some drums from Addictive Drums. Now I could start working with EZBass by bringing in some MIDI files or bringing in some audio files, but I prefer not to work that way. I like to go directly to the groove section. And the reason is I don't want to start searching for bass parts with something that's too on the nose with the drum part or the piano part or anything like that. And I'll let the great Rick Beato explain why I think that, and because he could do it better than I can.
Your pocket is the most important thing about your playing, meaning where do you play in relation to the groove? I always found that bass players that would play slightly behind the kick drum would make the low end sound huge. You should be able to play on top of the beat, behind the beat, ahead of the beat. Know what works for the particular song you're playing.
These are the chords that I played into Easy Keys, and if I click this thing, replace MIDI, at that point, when I play a pattern up here, it's going to play just according to the chords. So I mean, what I did is I went up here and I found reggae and I selected it, and you see it's there. So just going to start my anything here, anything I select is going to follow the chords. Okay, I'm going to pick this one. So I'm going to save changes. And there you can see down there is the pattern I just selected. So if I go to the grid editor, now once I have stuff in the grid editor, let's say I want to select these, and then I right click on that and I've got some articulations. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to slap it. And I'm going to slap this. I mean, it doesn't matter. This is just to show you an idea, and I'm gonna solo this so you can really hear. You know, I mean, I can do anything I want. I could, you know, give it any of these things. I could give it a percussive right hand. It's all kinds of articulations. And down here you can see there's a velocity thing, and I could increase, I could make them stand out a little bit more by increasing the velocity. The velocity tab is kind of interesting. I can select one and make it go up. I could select all of them, and using this I can have it go up with them maintaining their variations. I can change the dynamics between them, and I can even randomize them. And there's slopes, so I could have it, you know, like slanting down that way, or the same thing the other way. Now down here, if you hit Edit MIDI Play Style, then these knobs come up. And if you, for example, hit the octave, it's just going to go up one octave. Now the velocity is, I'm going to play it. Obviously, it affects the velocity of everything, not just some notes. And amount has to do with how many notes so you can make a busier pattern, or you could take it the other way and leave a little bit more openness to your bass part. If some of these notes, now that you opened it up, are kind of cutting off a little bit, so you can change the length here with this. And then if you control click on any of these, they go back to 0. Well, or their default thing, it's on this 0. You can also have general damping, like if I change this to damping. Damping is not an articulation in EZBass. It's an envelope, basically. So if you want to just have a few notes being damped, you've got to use the pencil tool and just draw it in, you know, like, you know, in the way you would do in your DAW, you know, just go up like so. Sorry. So anyway, okay, so that's how you would damp just some notes. Now, there's something really, really interesting with EZBass, and that's the transitions. And you have the ability to add various kinds of transitions. And you can do that by selecting a chord, either down there, or you can select it up here, which is a little bit easier because then you can see what you're working with. So let's say I want to put a transition right here between the G and the A minor. So let's say I put 2 shorts. It adds those 2 little short notes, and they sound like this. Da-da-dum. And okay, that's a little fast for me, so I'll make them longer. And so you've got all these different options. And so let's say with the F, I'm going to add a third. And what is that going to do? That's not real good. And you can experiment with all this stuff to get something that's interesting. You know, if you don't like that, you just take it off. The other thing is just like any DAW, you can drag notes around, move notes around. You can select all the notes and nudge them a little bit, so in case you want to experiment with the idea of taking your bass notes and making them a little behind the beat or ahead of the beat. What does EZBass remind me of? It reminds me more of a drum machine with this grid editor than it does of your typical virtual instrument. So I'm going to take this MIDI pattern and drag it into Cubase. Okay. Now, let's look at this MIDI pattern. Hard to see, but do you see these little notes? So basically, when you do that simple selection of an articulation within EZBass, it plants these key switch notes automatically into your song. And that means that once you put this on an EZBass track, then it exactly in the same way it'll play all the articulations. You could also export the MIDI and remove the articulations, or just adjust whatever other bass you might want to do, so that if it's slapping on your bass, you just have to make sure that you change all those notes on that thing and put it to the right place. Working on the song, the same song, with the ujam bass Royal, what I essentially did is I just played it. And so I could play an entire song live, and maybe with a little fixing up, I would have all my chords in. And I don't need to know what patterns I'm going to be using or any phrases I'm going to be using. The only thing that matters is I play the chords in. And as you can see by looking at the chords, there's all the kind of messiness of the way I'm playing, the way certain notes stretch out and stuff like that. And, you know, I did a little quantizing to make it work. But once you have the chords in, you can then go into Royal and pick a pattern. So as you can see, just by moving the key switches, I'm getting a lot of variations. If I do a fill, it automatically puts it back on the beat. The point is, on EZBass, what I'd be doing is I'd be going verse by verse, chorus by chorus, middle part by middle part, working on these things, trying to get some variation into it. Whereas with this, because I have just 11 patterns to work with, 11 phrases to work with, it's enough for me to get movement into it and to keep it interesting. Honestly, I think I could make a nice track out of this. And the fun part about it is that you play the phrases live, you know, you just feel it. You don't have to know what your goal is while you're doing it. Now, what about if you can't play? Well, most of you have programs like Scalar or even Easy Keys. You just input the chords using one of these other programs, and the ujam basses will follow them. And in fact, ujam has put an integration with Studio One on version 2 of the basses, so it basically works the same as EZBass, or very, very similarly in there. There's a few other things in here that you can adjust, that you could also do in further passes through it. One thing I'm not really crazy about is that when you look at the presets are organized by genres, but these aren't. So when you're going through the various, presets, the problem with presets is they change styles here, but they also change the sound of the instrument. So I have to keep kind of changing it back into something I like. I wish I could sort through genres. The sorting in EZBass is much, much better. Another thing that is a big problem is that the patterns that are available for one instrument are not available for the others. So, for example, this is the only one that's got reggae. So, you're stuck with the Royal if you want to do a reggae pattern. Of course, you can export MIDI, but I'm not tremendously crazy with the way it works. Let me show you. Basically, the way it works is I'll play a chord. So let me play a C chord, okay? And then I take that top part and I drag it out. Okay, so I'm going to play it. It's a little time consuming because it comes out 2 bars at a time, and you have to do some trimming to make it all work. It's not the easiest thing. If you compare it to the EZBass, that you can just drag the entire song out rather than to get these 1 bar or 2 bars at a time, it's not the easiest thing. But it's not really a big deal. We've seen how you can make a bass part with music that was written before. But what if you haven't created anything yet? What if you're just messing around, improvising, trying to figure out what exactly you want your music to be? So let's say I wanted to do something with this picked acoustic library from Native Instruments. It's pretty, and certainly I could create a song and I could add a bass part to it later. But what if I did them together? Because I'm playing chords to get those guitar parts, and if I play chords, it will also trigger bass parts on Dandy. So let's see what that sounds like. You can see, if you look on Dandy, you can see what I'm playing, and you can also see that, I don't know, it might be too small, but you can see what the ujam bass is recognizing. Okay, I'm going to try a different bass pattern. I'm going to do this one. See how it's kind of changing. Maybe I can do something a little faster with this. If you play the bass at the same time as the guitar, it changes things. The music is a combination of the bass and the guitar. Each one affects the other, and what comes out is a combination of the two. It satisfies that wish I expressed to you at the beginning of the video, to have a bass player come in and sit in with me. First thing you can see is that this is a 5-string bass. The ujam basses are just regular old 4 strings. So the low note on this is a B. You can actually go down to A. You can't even see it. So let's watch the fretboard logic of this thing as it goes up. So I'm going to go from B. Okay, when I get to E, it's the open E string. So now I'm going to go to A. All right, so A is 5th fret. It's not an open A. You don't get to go to the next string until you're on the 3rd fret for C. Okay, you only get to the next string when it's 5th fret, G. So you don't get to the highest string, your G string, until it's G flat. So what's that all about? No bass player plays a bass ignoring whole sections of the instrument, and nobody starts up that high on the fretboard. But on the other hand, if you just play it on your keyboard and don't look at this image, it sounds really nice. The ujam basses work differently. Every 4 frets, they move to the next string. So what's the significance of 4 frets? Well, when I'm playing a bass or this guitar, 4 frets is about as far as my normal size hands can reach. So in general, I'm going to be playing when I'm playing, I'm going to be moving up to the next string. It's a natural thing to do, and it's the way I was trained when I studied guitar. And then there's the whole issue of where you play on the neck. And I'm going to just switch to a video by Rick Beato.
It's just as important where you play, meaning between here and here, as it is whether you play with fingers or a pick. If you play close to the bridge, you're going to get a much more mid-rangey tone that jumps out and is better for single note playing or solos than if you play up here where you get a mellower, fatter tone with more low end.
The Toontrack people recorded the sound of each bass on this pickup and on that pickup. And then you can go up here and you can adjust how much you want of the bridge pickup or the neck pickup. And you can have it be all one, or you can have it be some mixture of the two. Under Royal, what you have is a knob, which is basically allows you to fluidly move just as you would move your hand. And so automating this thing can be something that's done by feel. And it's not a make one setting, I like this sound, but it's a musical thing where I'm going at this point in the song I want it on the neck, and at this point on the song I need it on the bridge. When I first looked at the EZBass effects, I went, wow, they kind of punted on this because there's only a few effects. But then I started to use them and they changed the controls. But there's slight differences as you go through these things. And what I found was these sounds are so good. Tremendous amount of work went into choosing these presets and making sure they're all winners, and tremendous amount of work went into what controls they give you to do it. So they kept it simple, and the results you're going to get and the variety that you can get with these things is really great. There also was some interesting thinking going on here because they have a sub bass, is something I don't normally see on a bass virtual instrument, something I more common on a synth, but a good idea, you know. Now if we go the ujam basses, you just have these things which are not knobs, they're switches. And one of them, like if you look at neutral and direct, those are just DI things. Those are like nothing being added to the character, that's nothing being added to the amp. So you really only have 3 choices here and there. So it's not a lot of selections, which keeps it really simple. And then you can start adding things like EQ. Very similar to the way they do everything. It's one knob, it's not a high, low, mid, or whatever. But like a typical ujam thing, let's say I turn it all the way over there. Then what it's doing is it's boosting the low mid, the high mid, and in particular, the high. So it's doing all those things. And let's say we go to EZBass. And it's here we have a bass, mid-range, mid-frequency, treble. So you kind of have to know a little bit about what you're doing to decide, well, I'm going to boost this, or I'm going to take this down, I'm going to get the sound. Again, it's not a lot of knobs here, and you can fool around with it and get what you want. All the ujam instruments are about giving you quick results. A place that is where ujam is really different is this thing called the finisher. It is a multi-effect device. It started out with their crazy guitar Carbon, which is almost like a sound design, cinematic design instrument, and they put it on there and people liked it so much and asked them to bring it out separately, and they came out with a freebie called Micro, and then 2 more finishers, Neo and Voodoo. So they added the finisher, 15 effects to all the basses when they got to version 2. And the Native Instruments keyboards work really well for finisher. You can change which kind of effect you want to get from finisher, and you can change the level. The history of the virtual electric bass actually started with a guitar instrument made by Steinberg called Virtual Guitarist. It was created by a company called Wizu. Previously, Wizu had created the first factory library for Halligan, among other things. One of the co-founders of Wizu was Peter Gorgas, who would later go on to co-found ujam. Because Steinberg already had a drum program, Groove Agent, there was demand to have a virtual bassist. But before that could happen, a group of programmers led by Sven Bornmark made Broomstick Bass. This was way more than a broomstick. It came with over 20 instruments, including an acoustic bass, a Chapman stick, and a lot of synth basses. 120 play styles in various genres, and a lot more. Then came virtual basses, lots more styles, parts, and fills, which made the autoplayer part much more useful. This to me is the start of the synergistic relationship between the multiple product lines that you see today in ujam and Toontrack. One thing you don't see in these ujam basses or in the EZBasses is stomp boxes, probably because they bring in a level of complexity that makes them not at all easy. Wizoo got bought by DigiDesign in 2005, and Steinberg was allowed to keep distributing the virtual basses for 2 more years, but after that, DigiDesign discontinued it. What followed were many years of innovation in sampling technology and realism, but the idea of auto-playing bass instruments kind of fell by the wayside. Spectrasonics' Trilogy, which eventually became Trillion, was a major event. Trillion has 34 gigabytes of some of the most legendary basses, a great acoustic bass, and as well as hundreds of bass synth sounds and full integration with Omnisphere and Stylus RMX. And then came the Scarby basses, the various ones that came with Complete. The next big advance in bass technology was IK Multimedia's Moto Bass. Just a completely physically modeled bass that came out around 2017. It had no samples in it at all. And this allowed you to do all kinds of crazy stuff, like have a dozen of the most famous basses that there have ever been in one instrument, and that was just the beginning. Not only could you have different articulations, you could also have different kinds of strings and different gauges, and they could be old, new, broken in. You could change the pickups, which, you know, and move them around. It's ridiculous how much you can control this thing. I think that by the time Peter Gorgas and team at UJAM got around to making the UJAM basses, it was 14 years after the original virtual basses, and it was a completely different world for making music on computers. Back in the early 2000s, I think most people who were doing music on their computers knew how to play an instrument, or knew something about music theory, something. But now that's not so prevalent, and the idea that giving people thousands of options can actually slow a lot of them down and make it harder. So UJAM, with the instruments that they brought out, started hiding these choices under the hood and making it possible to just load up these instruments and make them sound great. While other companies make recreations of famous basses, UJAM started by making music playlists and selected bass guitars for kinds of music. So nobody needs to know that the Royal is a Fender jazz bass, or the Rowdy is a Fender Precision, and Dandy is a Hofner Beato bass. You don't need to be a bass guitar expert. It's just about how do you want to use this. If you can afford to, I think you should buy both of them. But if you have to choose which one, I think it depends on what kind of musician you are and what you're looking for. Based on what Toontrack has done with EZDrummer and EZKeys and EZMix, I think it's fair to guess that they're going to be creating a lot of basses and a lot of MIDI patterns in various genres. So that's the advantage of going with them. I don't think that UJAM is going to be creating a lot of new basses. They've never been in that business. What I think we're going to see instead are a lot of updates with new features, more MIDI patterns, and more finisher presets. So which one am I going to be using the most? Well, I know exactly what kind of musician I am. I like to play more than I like to take music to an absolute finish. I think you saw how much fun I was having in the section where I played guitar and bass at the same time. That's the kind of thing I'm going to be doing. But when I do take something to a finish, I'm very compulsive about it. And I can spend several months working on something. So EZBass kind of frightens me. I could see myself spending 3 or 4 days just doing a bass part, fine-tuning every single verse, making every single part of it a little bit different. On the other hand, I also think that the techno nerd part of myself will have a tremendous amount of fun playing with all that stuff. Thanks for watching. Now go out and play some bass.